but doesn't their civil service system retain a continuity of professionals running these departments, and they don't have the turnover that we do from administration to administration, and every new governor that comes in wants to bring a new person in to run every one of these departments, and you lose that continuity of, because a lot of these changes aren't quick. They take time, they take perseverance, they take a continuity of leadership from over periods of time. Is there something about our system which has so much turnover and change at the administrative level that harms or holds us back from being able to implement these sort of longer-term changes?
This is a very good question, and these separating asset management from this daily influence or quick influence of changing politics, it's very important. And I think that this is one of the reasons why Canadians started creating these corporations, because it's increasing level of separation. The same with outsourcing. You know, when you outsource, you are binded by the contract, and go violate the contract, it will cost you the fortune. So I think that, yes, you need a level of separation. And so I'm sure that if you do this comprehensive thinking, what should be done, one of your recommendations would be that let's protect asset management from these quick changes.
It's so interesting to me because just to make the point, because maybe it's because it's on my mind. I'm thinking about energy. ISO is an asset management entity. That's what it does. It manages frequency and generation of power to be delivered. It's a public trust, public corporation. It is insulated from the kinds of concerns that we're talking about. Highly professional. They can motivate people, and they can pay them well.
Civil service exempt.
Civil service exempt.
Question of me,
yes,
Mr. Chairman, or maybe a comment that we're talking about privatization, but the more the private sector manages for us, the more they can charge us. So what is the incentive for them to minimize the size of the assets they manage? When we talk about maybe getting rid of the surplus, why should the private sector encourage us to get rid of the surplus? Because the more they manage, the more they can charge us.
Well, it depends. It depends how you structure a contract with them. This is when you are talking about the issue of the model of outsourcing. If you outsource the management of the portfolio, why this private manager would be interested to privatize, to dispose some surplus properties? I think that it would be easy to suggest the incentives for them, at least not to oppose this. And I'm sure the previous speaker who is here, he perfectly can suggest how this can be done. It's a question of how you structure the contract.
Something I observe as I listen to you, coming from the private sector myself. And then when we make comparisons to other governments, obviously there are political differences. And also, if I was to compare even just California to UK or the Brits, the size of the inventories we have, the size of the government, the size of the country itself, even though we're a state, but and the population that we control, or the taxations, all that has to be taken into consideration rather than what's worked for them, what can possibly work for us. It can be the same prescribed medicine, but it might come with a side effect to a different individual as it will be to a different governmental entities.
It's a very good point, of course, but I think that Canada and the provinces and Brits, by the size of the economy, they are comparable to California. I did not suggest you to look at some small one city somewhere which is managing its affair well. But you cannot transfer the experiences directly. There are structural analogies, but of course you need to adjust to your system, no doubt.
And I would only say, in response to I wasn't primarily a commercial developer in my previous career. I was primarily a housing guy. but we probably had 1 million square feet that we developed and built and owned and operated. And I had private property managers because I didn't want to run and own a property management department. So I had property managers that managed the properties for them. But as the owner, I made all the decisions about what we sold, what we bought, when we downsized, when we terminated leases, when we didn't terminate leases. They were the manager, but I was, our company was the decision maker about how we were going to, use and maximize the value of those assets, and they were our managers, and they did what we asked them to do. They managed the properties.
If I could, some small clarification for the previous testimony. Currently, the Department of General Services, they are managing 30% of land, but 44% of floor space.
Yeah. I mean, figures can mislead, and a lot of that is in the State Lands Commission, which
you cannot touch.
Which is a lot is title lands and water and other things that have public trust ownership associated with it or not. But it does, make the point that it's spread out in a lot of places, and the management is pretty convoluted.
Yeah, and also I agree with the previous testimony that the Department of General Services, it's a big entity. They manage 44% of floor space, but still there are other big departments, big property holders. I think that one of the important recommendations which I would make is that you have to introduce universal requirements which should be applied to all departments. It's not just General Service Administration. If you want some efficiency in space use or cost efficiency, it should be applicable to all of them.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Thank you very much for your testimony. It was very informative, and it's a resource hopefully we'll be able to continue to call on.
Yeah, and I'm leaving this with your stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Stuart, if you call our next witness, please.
Next witness will discuss the potential benefits of asset mapping through geospatial information systems. Scott Gregory is the state's Geographic Information Officer for the California Technology Agency. Previously, Mr. Gregory oversaw and managed the GIS system for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Sacramento District, and he managed the Public Safety Homeland Security market for the California Regional Office of ESRI.
Welcome. Thank you for coming, and please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hancock and distinguished members of the Commission, for the opportunity to come and speak to you about geospatial technology. It's something I'm very passionate about, and excited to share with you some of the benefits I think the state could realize from the use and implementation of this kind of technology to manage assets. I think before I get started, one consistent theme I noticed throughout all the testimony here today, a common thread, was the notion of geography or location. Geographic information systems, the benefit of that, or of instituting that kind of technology to support asset management, is the notion of managing location, understanding proximity, understanding what's near and the where questions. So with that, I think I'll start with a bit of an introduction on what is GIS. So geographic information systems is really a way in which we manage location-based information. It allows us to query, catalog, manage, visualize, and disseminate geographic information. And through my experience in the past, through the Army Corps of Engineers and working for the Department of Defense, we applied GIS to asset management quite prolifically throughout the western United States on Army installations, which you can imagine are somewhat like small cities. They have infrastructure just like the state owns. They manage facilities. They manage environmental concerns. And all those are tied to location. So when we think about GIS, the notion of applying GIS to to asset management, we can kind of break that down from my perspective and my experience into three specific areas. Looking at condition assessments of assets, doing an asset inventory, what do we actually have, where are our gaps in inventory, understanding where our assets are in terms of property and human capital. What assets do we have as people? Where are they located in proximity to issues and problems that we're trying to solve? And then space allocation and utilization. I prepared a few examples of how we've applied geospatial technology to solving real-world problems from an asset management perspective. I'd like to, if I can, share a couple examples that I've had firsthand experience in. The first is at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. Not a bad place to, I think, be stationed or deployed. Beautiful location, beautiful campus. They have a very unique mission within the Department of Defense. They are charged with teaching and training defense languages. And you can imagine there's a number of languages that we want to be competent and aware of as we project our influence worldwide. And at the time that we did the study for space utilization, this was about 2003. We had expeditionary forces moving into Iraq, and we recognized DoD-wide that we had a deficiency in the understanding of Arabic and Eurasian languages to a level that was proficient enough for us to be able to project our influence. Recognizing that, Garrison Command tasked the unit that I managed to do a space utilization survey. And the challenge that we recognized is that they didn't know where their space was allocated. They had no visual means to be able to understand that, to be able to manage that information. So the process that we went through was to go down to the actual floor plan, from an aerial photo map, floor plan, and then be able to analyze and articulate what assets they actually had. What languages were being taught in certain classrooms, what space was allocated for that, and we determined that there was a huge, huge gap in the amount of space allocated for mission-specific priorities that was not being addressed because they were looking at it from a spreadsheet. They couldn't visualize it. And that's the real power of GIS, is that we have the ability and the capacity to visualize geographic information. Their spreadsheets all reference the locations of these facilities, but they couldn't see them. And that's where GIS became very powerful. And some of the benefits they realized from that was they developed a brand new space utilization plan and allocation plan. Much like a land use plan that a planner would use in the external environment, if you think about a space utilization plan, it's for the internal, for the built environment internally. So lining up business processes to align with where we allocate space for individuals or business units to work. Proximity to those is very important to streamline and be more efficient. They also recognized the fact that they had a tremendous amount of cost savings in operation and maintenance. They were no longer maintaining facilities and buildings that did not have a focus on the mission that was currently being mandated to them, which was key. The second example that I wanted to share was another from an Army installation called Sierra Army Depot in the sleepy little town of Herlong, California on the eastern Sierra. Yeah, small town, not a lot going on, but they have a very, or rather had a very, do you know her?
No, that's what I say.
Never heard of it.
Completely new.
Yeah. Do you? Yeah, it's near Susanville, a little bit south of Susanville on the 395. At any rate, Sierra Army Depot at one time was a major munitions depot during World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam. But as the Cold War ended, their mission focus sort of waned. They were up for BRAC, which is base realignment and closure, and the command at Sierra Army Depot and our South Pacific Division office wanted us to really understand how we could apply GIS to facilities management, to change mission focus, to make it a viable property for use by the military. So we did the very same thing. We went out, we mapped their facilities. We figured out what they had, where their assets were, and how valuable were they really to them. Put that into a GIS and began to ask the where or the what-if questions. The questions of how much square footage do we have for this specific mission tasking? What available space do we have if we take on a new mission or a new focus? And that was actually the question that they were asking. So this was all in relation to, at the time, was called the GWAT, or Global War on Terrorism. They needed to realign themselves to fit within that mode. So the process was similar.
Who was the client?
The client was Department of Defense, U.S. Army.
Okay.
The benefits from being able to map out their assets and find their locations was we did a full condition assessment of the entire installation. The installation had approximately 350 buildings. We did something called an ISR, an installation status report, red, yellow, and green. Green is good. Yellow, we might want to look into it. Red, potential demolition, or reallotment or repurposing. We were able to articulate that down to how much square footage would be repurposed, what the potential cost associated with that was, and as a result, Sierra Army Depot avoided the BRAC target for that round, at least, and they then instituted GIS as a facilities management tool for any future development they would do. And we saw this trend go across the western U.S. from Air Force installations, or bases rather, to Army, Navy as well. Prolific users of geospatial technology, and they really realized the benefit of it. So some of the questions that were posed, I'd like to begin to address, as I just addressed with the previous question, in really looking at what are the benefits and kind of the business proposition of utilizing GIS for asset management. To me, in my experience, it breaks down to three categories. It's the ability to save time and money. We all know that we are constrained by that now. No one has time and no one seems to have money. It allows us to do that because it helps us understand the disposition of our assets, where they are, what the condition of them are in relation to other items that we manage. It increases collaboration. The notion of the SPI, the State Property Inventory, is fantastic, and we know that other organizations manage similar databases and might apply similar tools. I would propose that an interesting way to look at that is that we would perhaps look at a statewide capability to manage those assets in a like way, graphically, visually, through GIS. Lastly, it improves decision support. The ability to not look at a spreadsheet, but look at a map and be able to run some true geographic analysis and queries against databases and geographic features can truly bring more light to the decisions that we make and can support the decisions we make in a more efficient manner. So when we look at that, obviously there's costs associated. There's costs associated with everything. And when we institute a system, we look at infrastructure and hardware and software and whatnot. GIS is no different. To articulate a cost for a statewide GIS, it would require looking at the scope of what that may entail, what are existing systems that we have in place, data and data conversion to pull it into a format that is usable within the GIS. But once these types of I won't say hurdles, because there are always things that we need to look at whenever we move forward in any type of endeavor. But when we look at these things, once those costs are attained or achieved, the return on investment is tremendous. The ability for us to look statewide at the disposition of our assets, I don't know if it's done now. I can't say that it is. But I would say it'd be a very compelling argument to moving towards implementing a geographic information system for the management of those types of things. So when we look at this and we move forward in thinking about where we can go with this, my office in particular, the Geographic Information Officer Office out of the Technology Agency, my main focus is to develop a SDI for the state of California. SDI means Spatial Data Infrastructure. And that spatial data infrastructure is to support the use of geographic information systems across the enterprise. And when I refer to the enterprise, I'm talking about across state government, to include collaboration with city, county, federal, nonprofit, and the private sector. There's many initiatives in place right now that we're driving towards that I think will benefit perhaps a future integration or use of geographic information systems for asset management. And I'd like to share with you a couple of those items that we're working on currently. Currently, in response to an IT policy letter 10-15, which is a geocoding policy letter, it was written last year, December 27th, actually, of 2010, that it came out. Basically, it requires organizations to geocode their database. And what does that mean? Geocoding a database means taking the locational elements from a database, giving them an XY coordinate or a location on Earth so it can be mapped. This is tremendous because if you can imagine the amounts and volumes of data that the state manages, a lot of it is geographic in nature. But there currently isn't a statewide tool to allow them to look at trends and patterns in their data, and that's something that we're going to provide. And I think that tool could be a foundational element for providing some insight into where assets are and how we could begin to manage those. Secondly, something I'm very excited about is something called the statewide GeoPortal. GeoPortal is exactly what it says. It's our ability to understand and articulate what our data portfolio is for geospatial data in the state. Currently, there are many portals throughout the state that are focused on specific business areas. There could be one for environmental or water or others. But what we lack is a cohesive approach statewide to understanding what our data portfolio is. And that's something that my office is actively engaged in and will be developing. That could be of tremendous benefit when we look at assets throughout the state and their proximity and relationship to other types of data. For example, our assets or buildings or facilities in relation to floodplains or in relation to faults or demographics. Where's our potential employment pool? Are our services getting to the right segments of our population? That type of data and that type of supporting data and the ability to visualize that and understand it will be provided statewide. And we're looking to roll that out in the August timeframe. We're also looking at developing what we call framework data. Framework data is common data that most organizations throughout the state leverage and utilize. These things could be information like aerial photography, roads, property information, parcel databases, which is of tremendous value to most government organizations. And that's a process and an initiative that we're going to continually be working on to refine our data offerings to government, to business, and to citizenry. I personally look at those three levels of interaction as my customer base. And being able to provide tools, mechanisms, and capabilities to them to be able to explore information geographically is a great goal of mine. Lastly, I'd like to share with you that we are engaging in the development of a mobile computing platform that will integrate geospatial technology. Why this is important to asset management is because typically when we go and we do surveys for assets, we're in the field. We need to be able to map features in the field. This mobile platform and this strategy for the state will leverage mobile computing platforms to take advantage of the GPS device that's in most people's phones in this room, and it's on my hip as well, and then integrate state geospatial content into that. So imagine the value it would bring to a citizen if citizens could understand where the state owns assets or information in an app on their phone provided by the state. I think it's a very compelling argument, and it's an interesting way for us to begin to sort of expose this rich content that we've managed for a very long time to our stakeholders. So with that, I apologize if it was brief, but I wanted to be as concise as possible.
Okay. Questions from the Commission?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please proceed.
Yesterday at the meeting, my understanding was that different agencies, state agencies, have their own parcel numbers. And my thought was, coming from a county government, why would that be the case? Why aren't we all have the same parcel number that we can all go to in the county data during their and understand where the property is, who owns it, size, and all? In your experience, was there a need for different agencies to have a different parcel number that did not match with the county assessor's office's parcel number?
Now, in my experience, when it comes to assessor parcel data, inconsistency seemed to be the rule. We have 58 counties, 58 different assessors. They articulate assessor or APN numbers, assessor parcel numbers, in different ways. One of the ways we're looking to combat that is we're currently in contract with our UC system, the Strategic Growth Council, to develop a statewide parcel fabric or database that has consistency in land use valuation or rather attribution. What I mean by that is if you went to LA County, low density residential could be noted in the database different than what Orange County would note it as, if that makes sense. So the two counties are next to each other. You couldn't tell either way which one was what. We're looking to make consistent strides across that database so that when we look at something in Modoc County, it's expressed the same way as it is in San Diego County. Another issue we run into there is the idea of many different parcel databases across the state being managed by different groups. What is authoritative? What is the authoritative piece of information that we make our decisions off of? That's something that my office has been investigating, and we're moving towards one authoritative parcel data set that all organizations can leverage and use to make decisions off of.
Where is that in the process?
In the process, we are in actual contract. Well, there's two things. In the process for developing the statewide parcel database, we're in contract. That contract should be completed in 2013. In the meantime, in the interim, I'm in contract to acquire that parcel data and making it available to the state as a web service accessible through the internet, and also as a download for organizations to use in their GIS.
So I think it simplifies things.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So does this system that you're talking about overlay the existing county assessors parcel systems, or does it eliminate the existing county assessors parcel systems?
I think it complements it.
So it operates parallel but separate from?
I guess you could say that, yeah. I mean, the source of the data itself is from...
Because I don't think you want to go in and redo all the county's assessor parcels systems.
No way.
Okay.
No way. And we're certainly not in the business to do that. No.
We can't get our parcel information, though. We have to go to the county to get it.
Yeah.
I mean, but it would be great if you could go to a map and find out the parcel numbers for.
Yeah, we're definitely not looking to reinvent the wheel.
The mapping that you were talking about that you did for the military and others, that's like, I'll call it space plan kind of mapping.
Sure.
Is that sort of the first cut that you're recommending? I'm looking at sort of, how you use this to sort of assist the, whatever entity is going to be the asset manager for the state or whatever we recommend.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that that's several layers down from, the first thing you want to be able to do is identify where the properties are, who's in them, how big they are, what the relationship is of one to the other.
Right.
And, you sort of start with the most basic information.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. Yeah. That's exactly how you start. You get an understanding of what your initial inventory is.
And we don't have that.
I don't know. I
It's
don't
not
know the answer to
still
that.
the state property inventory doesn't qualify as that piece of information.
I can't say without digging into it if it is or not. My assumption is that the state property inventory in general is an inventory of statewide property, but to what level it's mapped and to degrees of accuracy, I couldn't speak to.
So it's basically, as you would envision it, taking that data and mapping it into a GIS system, where it's not only is it on, as you said, spreadsheets and paper, but it's mapped and and identified with numbers and with.
That's correct. So if you imagine that database has a number of records within it, the key is the locational element, the address, the zip code. You take that and you put that on a map, then all of that associated database information is now ascribed to that specific location. So then we can start doing the what-if questions. We can start querying the data and understanding it more. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly how you start. You look at what you have, then you move towards refining it down to a finer scale.
Right.
Going even perhaps down to the floor plan to start doing space utilization.
Right. Okay. Any other questions from the Commission? Yeah, Commissioner Bradshaw.
So you could use this, for example, not to bring up emergencies again, but the 2008, 9, and 10 emergencies, fires specifically. So when we were using satellite imagery so we could know what assets were being potentially in the line of fire and what had actually been destroyed. This actually could give us information more rapidly because you'd know, you could react, you could move people, you could look to prevent, where to, deploy manpower, that you could use it like that?
Absolutely. In fact, during the '07 fires, 07, 08, there was a fire siege there for a number of years. During that time, we did employ the use of geospatial technology to locate where critical infrastructure was in the path of the fire. And the fire path was actually a dynamic data feed that was coming from the U.S. Forest Service. So we could actually, by the locations of our facilities and then knowing the population at risk, we could begin to do that analysis to show, okay, well, if we displace this population, where could we find other facilities or land or infrastructure to support them? Because as you recall, 500,000 people evacuated from San Diego. Yeah, San Diego County EOC and the State Operations Center used GIS, and it was an instrumental tool in helping relocate those people and also understanding this.
Income levels and
Yeah.
the kind of jobs we had.
I recall that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's certainly a tool. Again, to reiterate, that common thread between everything is geography to a location. So whether it's your facility, whether it's population at risk, whether it's in the path of natural disaster, GIS helps us answer those what if or where kind of questions.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
I thank
appreciate
you.
your testimony. Very informative, and we'll be in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I believe we have a final witness. If you could call that, please, Stuart.
Final witness is will help us understand the situation with the California Fairgrounds. Rebecca Desmond became the director of the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Division of Fairs and Expositions in July 2011 after serving as assistant director and acting director of the division. Previously, Ms. Desmond had also served 10 years as the chief executive officer for the 10th District Agricultural Association, Siskiyou Golden Fair, in Wairika. Good morning.
That's correct.
Welcome. Thank you for coming,
Morning.
and please proceed.
Thank you. Well, as you've read in my written testimony that I submitted, the question about state ownership of fairgrounds is not a simple one. And as previous testimony today, that kind of supports that. You know, there's a big question, why does the state own fairgrounds? And the state has owned fairgrounds for many, many years. And one of the biggest things is that fairs are not quite understood by the general public, fairgrounds, as to what they do. They are not just an annual event. You know, I respectfully disagree with Mr. Salmon's perception that they're, you know, dormant 300 days out of the year. Most fairgrounds are operating all the time. Not necessarily with something that people will see. At my fairgrounds, we did RV and boat storage during the winter months, which in Siskiyou County was a great community asset because with a lot of snow, you couldn't park your RV on the street because the snow plows would come by, and so we provided a service, you know, to house those units. Of course, you drive by the fairgrounds, you don't see that. You don't see activity happening, things like that. So you have a fine combination of what are the benefits to the public, the benefits to the state, and the benefits to the community of fairgrounds. And I say they're vast, and it goes from the local level to the state level. And, you know, aside from being highly community relevant, from in some communities being the only place you can have your wedding reception or retirement party or quinceañeros or whatever celebration you would like to have, to the sole source of agriculture education for a lot of our public, you know, kids and adults alike. This is where they find out where their food and fiber comes from. You know, it's not just all cotton candy and carnivals. There's a lot more to a fair and a fairgrounds. And then there's also the emergencies, talking about the emergency support and how much fairgrounds play a role. Well, a lot of it is in standby and preparedness, that they are there. Fairgrounds are the only place that people, pets, and livestock can be evacuated to a single location in California. And so, you know, it allows folks to go, as in San Diego, to go evacuate to the fairgrounds with their horses or with their, you know, prized dogs. You know, lesson from Katrina, people won't leave their animals at home, so they won't leave. And you have an emergency, you want to get the folks to a safe place. GIS is used in finding out what fairgrounds are available, what assets they have. I'm not an expert in GIS, but We have we can go over a fairgrounds and it can show the attributes. I believe that's the correct word. And that shows what facilities are available, how many people it can house, what types of shower facilities, those kinds of things are available in real time on a moment's notice. So it's a great asset as well. We do have there are 52 active district agricultural associations in the state. They are 41 of them are on state-owned property. The rest are either don't have a facility. We have 4 fairs that lease a facility for their annual event, and then we have 8 fairs, including my former fair, that are leased property from the county or the city, and one actually is leased from the Los Angeles Water and Power District, and then we have the California State Fair, which is on state property. So those are the 42 state assets that we have. And right now, the department is looking at with the elimination of general fund support of fairs in the 2011-12 state budget. It's kind of a whole new day for fairgrounds, state fairs and county fairs alike. They're now relying on 100% self-sufficiency, just as the Assemblyman had referred to earlier. So for some fairs, Orange County, Del Mar, little blip in the budget. For other fairs, such as in Modoc and some of the other rural areas, it's a big deal. So fairs are having to be very innovative and creative now, and how are they going to raise enough revenues to keep their facilities open, have relevance to the community, maintain the facilities. Most of these fairgrounds were built, 50 to 60 years ago, and they're all starting to fall apart, in big ways, in $500,000 ways. Old water systems are going out, old sewer systems are going out, things along that line. So they're trying to come up with new and different ways to raise revenues. One is that we're encouraging them to look at is more use of ground leases, especially for the DAAs. We call it the Madera model, which is one of our DAAs down in Madera, where they did a ground lease to a developer, and now they have a Lowe's and a Petco and some other things in a parking lot that was rarely used, and it provides great income to the fair, and they're investing that back into their facility, and so they are self-sufficient, and it's a great public-private partnership that we consider a success. The Cow Palace is working with DGS and looking at a similar proposition down there in Daly City. So, there's lots of different things to look at. Right now, CDFA does not support the sale of state fairgrounds. We don't consider them surplus properties. I know a list went out several years ago saying, here's all these surplus properties that should be sold, and Orange County Fair and Ventura County Fair and several big, very, very busy fairgrounds were on there. DGS has a different way of calculating what is fully utilized and what is underutilized property, and last time you all met in October, I spoke to that. They have a certain system looking at, it's more like of an office building than a fairgrounds. Fairgrounds, when it comes to the state system, it's kind of square peg, round hole. They don't always fit. And so you have to look at that they are utilized 365 days out of the year. Now, while one particular hall might not be rented Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, it's certainly rented Friday through Monday, with a weekend event. And during the week, that's when it's cleaned, painted, things along that line. So we don't consider that we have any surplus fairgrounds, and because of the different benefits that they offer the state and to their communities, that we believe that they should keep on going as state entities, and we're trying to do what we can to support them and give them opportunities and assist them to find opportunities to be more entrepreneurial and take advantage of some of the land use opportunities that they have to raise more revenues. So, and with that, I will turn it over for questions.
Commissioner Kay?
So what's the issue here that we're talking about? I mean, the state's getting out of the general fund support of the fairs. You claim that they're locally useful, supported, high capacity. What's the issue that we're talking about?
Well,
or maybe I should ask.
Yeah, I was invited here.
Yeah, what's the issue that we're talking about?
Assemblymember Ma asked us to look at what she considered a lack of discussion into the future of the state fairs when lots of people were talking about selling off the state fairs. So wanted to see what could be done, what was being done.
Because of the belief that they were surplus property?
Right.
Okay,
That the
so
asset had a value that
Because
could
the
be
asset
sold.
had a value,
Okay.
let's sell it.
Okay. Thanks. And so your claim, and I perhaps there's more. Have you systematically looked at the fairs or the fairgrounds, the facilities in the state, and sort of determined that that there's either an intrinsic value in terms of emergency management or community development, or an economic value in terms of their getting revenues for storing motorhomes, that for each of the fair properties that the state owns, or are you giving us more sort of a gut level anecdotal sense of what's out there?
A little bit of both. Our economic impact data, which I included in my written report, but the overall general numbers, it's a $2.85 billion economic impact to the state, is we conducted an economic impact study. It was originally contracted out in 2002 and to KPM. And then we took the formulas from that initial study and reworked the figures from 2009, and we're working on 2010 currently, that shows the sales tax generated, jobs generated, things like that at fairgrounds. So there's the economic end. We haven't gone fairgrounds to do a full study of all of those different benefits, but we have worked with Cal EMA and Cal Fire, where they have said, please don't close any fairgrounds. They are a huge part of the state emergency response system. We have asked them, do you have a priority list? Which ones are, more important? Of course, it depends on where you are. And again, in some of the more rural areas, the fairgrounds is it. That's the only facility that there is to house either a command center or people or inmate crews, things along that line. Bigger, more metropolitan areas, maybe they have other facilities that they can do that with. We have not done that.
So OES said don't close any of them. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in our discussions with them, they said, we need those, and that's when we asked them if you could supply us with a priority list, and they said, well, we don't really have a priority list.
And how much does Cal EMA pay the fairgrounds each year for the use of those facilities?
It depends on how they're used. When they go into a fairgrounds, there's a contract established and there's a daily rate that's established. So it depends on what the daily rate is.
And that's negotiated fairgrounds by fairgrounds?
Yes, it's fairgrounds by fairgrounds. It depends on length of stay.
Yeah, go ahead.
In our earlier discussion, we talked about some of the issues involved in the transfer of fairs to, say, another entity, and that it wasn't. My takeaway was that it wasn't as simple as some folks might have thought it might have been. Are there issues that make something more attractive for development or other kinds of uses under fair ownership than it would be should it be transferred to another entity?
Well, right now there's only been, I think, a full title search on one of the district agricultural associations in the state. And because a lot of these fairgrounds, again, they were established at the turn of the century, before the turn of the century, the last century, 1900s, when, and so, a family, my former fairgrounds was a dairy farm that a family donated to the state. It ran it was state property until the Depression. It shut down. After the Depression, the community revived it, and then the state, for whatever reason, donated the property to the county and established these 50-year leases. But the title of a lot of these fairgrounds is very unclear. Some of it says State of California. Some of it says, 32nd District Agricultural Association. Some of it, if it's no longer going to be used as a fairgrounds, then it needs to revert back to the family that donated, or that's only a portion of it. Say that's 25 acres, and then the other 75 acres is something else. So it's not as simple as being a nice square lot that that can be sold. So it can that can cause a lot of delays. Again, nobody has taken the time or spent the money on having these full title searches done on these properties, just due to the time and cost. But there are ground lease options, that can for developers to come in and do something on if there's a portion of the fairgrounds that is not used as much.
Do they have a different treatment under the zoning laws?
Yes, they don't. As a state entity, they do not have to comply with any local zoning or ordinances. We always encourage them to be good neighbors and work with their cities and counties, but they can. They don't have to go by local building codes, even though they have to go by state building codes. But they can. They don't have to get permits.
Well, they're subject to CEQA, so I mean,
they're totally subject to CEQA, and it's more like when it comes to sign ordinances.
I mean, when they
things like
surplus
that.
the Agnew site, they went through a whole, specific plan, comprehensive entitlement process that was as comprehensive as any private developer would have done. Assemblymember Sajjan.
Thank you. The only way they have to work with the local is the health department. It still has to
Correct.
prove up their food
service.
Just to add a few more and how it's complicated the issues a little more, some of the other activities are car shows and bicycle shows, which attracts local tourism, so to say, because those communities who don't have a fairground, they do those on their streets by blocking the roads and creating a lot of confusion for locals and others. At the fair, and by no means I take any credit for this, we have the Heritage Foundation, which is a good partnership with the locals who have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve the infrastructure, to add structure, to add air conditioning units where the animals are shown, so it's not because of the weather conditions. Right. So if you come to sell, what do you do with the private money that has been invested? And to add to a little more to the emergency, it's also a training center.
Yes.
For a lot of local
law enforcement, right.
And it's a good give and take, because when we don't charge, let's say, local enforcement to come in for training, but they don't charge us when the traffic increases by twofold and they have to increase their patrol by twofold. There's such a partnership. Now, in any organization, there's a bad apple. Because of that bad apple, that's not penalize the entire fair industry, if I may put it that way.
Correct.
Very good examples. We run it just like it was a private sector business-like, and that's why we have gone from having $0 coming from the state to running a fair that has a $10 million budget.
Correct.
So let's give credit where the credit is due, and if we ever want to do something, let's maybe first give them an incentive to improve themselves. Otherwise, consider it a surplus. As much as I believe in real estate, and I believe in banking on real estate properties, but that's me.
I completely agree.
Commissioner Brewer?
So, of the 52 fairs or the districts in existence, how many of them are financially successful?
At this point, it's hard to say in black and white, because they've only had, they were fully funded in 2011. They run on a calendar year. We run on a fiscal year.
There are, as I understood it, and this is old information, there are only like 4 fairs statewide that return money to the state that operated in the black.
No, that's not correct. I would say there are several fairs that have healthy reserves, and why they did rely on some state funds, and it was all the way from $50,000 to $200,000 depending on what their operating revenues were. There are some that are struggling a little bit, and they were struggling before the budget cut. And it has to do with, management practices. The economy going bad definitely affected, fair attendance in some cases declined in some areas. In others, it went up. People stayed home. They didn't go out of town on vacation. They went to their local fair. So I would say, they're all in fairly good financial shape currently. Now, as of today. Now, where it goes from here as reserves start to decline, and depending on what cost-cutting measures they take or revenue-generating measures they take, will be determined as we, go down in the future years. I would say that 2013 will be more telling than 2012.
So, have you looked at a potential failure rate amongst the fairs with the state funding being withdrawn?
We keep very close eye on the District Agriculture Associations. There's 78 fairs altogether in California. And yes, we watch their budgets and then their year-end financials and their audits. And those that are starting to get into decline, we used to have a program that was called Priority Fairs because they were given priority. And instead of writing them checks, we sent them consultants on how to do different things in strategic planning and such. But of course, with the elimination of funding, hence our budget was cut in half, and we're down to 6 permanent people and about 6 part-time. So we keep an eye on these folks. Again, they have their own board of directors appointed by the governor, and so we try to work with the management and the board to talk about options and things that they can look at and what they can do. And so we do pay attention to that. And if they're getting dangerously close, it's something that we have to keep an eye on, because the big question is, and Commissioner Mitchell brought it up in October, is what happens if one fails and closes, and then what will happen, and who will be responsible, and who will take over. And there's only been 2 district ag associations ever decommissioned in the history of district ag associations, and neither one of them owned property. And that was back in the late 90s. And they rented office space, and then they had, when they folded, they had, some computers and some desks and stuff, and it was divided among existing DAAs, and that was the end of that. Now, what happens with property? Who pays for the power and the water? Because, CAL FIRE and Cal EMA would like to see them still available for emergency services. Who provides security? Do you mow the lawn? Do you not mow the lawn?
So what I hear you saying is, no, there is no exit plan.
We're trying to develop one right now to figure out what, and we've looked at cost estimates, and it's anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 a year to maintain the fairgrounds, depending again on the size and what the type of property is, how many buildings, how much grass. And then there's the whole other issue of, was the fair able to pay all the compensated leave balances to the employees before they closed down? And if not, who's responsible for that? Is that a DPA issue, or is that a CDFA issue? Again, the DAAs are not part of CDFA, but we do have oversight over them, limited oversight. So these are all things yet to be determined that we're working on currently.
Thank you.
Are all these fairgrounds, with the lack of general fund support, going to put a fair on this year?
Yes. In 2012, we have not been notified of any fairs not happening in 2012.
Everybody's going to try.
Yes.
So that's why you say you'll have a better idea in 2013.
Yes. And again, it depends on how creative and innovative they are, how much money they have in the bank, what they do with it. They have, several have these great nonprofit organizations that assist with a lot of the capital improvements. Some are forming nonprofits now. They didn't have them before. They're seeing the benefit in that. There's a lot of changes going on in how fairs are operating.
Do you have any interaction with the ones that are not state-owned, that are county-owned?
Yes, we used to have a lot of interaction when we also allocated funds to them, and whether it was a base allocation, which the large fairs didn't get, but the live racing fairs would get money through us. Some of the things, and there's the network of California fairs, which is even identified in code. It's the 78 fairs in California, and we provided fiscal and policy assistance to them as well, even though we didn't pay attention to their contracting matters and their purchasing, policies and things like that we do with the state fairs. But it's a very strong network, and they work really well together. They share equipment. They, do lots of, exchanges of staff and things like that to help out at fair time and other big events.
Are they under the same stresses that the state-owned associations are?
Some of them are, yes. Yeah, some of them. Some are nonprofits contracting with the county and operating on county property. Some are county agencies, and again, there's some that are more successful than others, and a lot depends on where their geographic location is and their market.
And you would really try to support hanging on to the Cow Palace?
Well, the Cow Palace is, aside from its greatness...
Haven't been cows in there in a long time.
Yeah. No, there's cows in there every year.
That was a rodeo, yeah.
Well, no, as the Grand National, which is a junior and senior livestock.
Yeah. And there's a boat show.
It's a big livestock show that a lot of kids look forward to every year from around the state. And, as long as the Cow Palace is providing the benefits it was designed to do, then yes, if it's no longer doing that. The Cow Palace has gone through a big change in the last couple of years. I know it lost a lot of events. Some of the events they didn't invite back that it lost, people aren't very upset about that. It's really trying. It's coming back. It's now Daly City. They just signed a farm hockey team. I didn't know there were farm hockey teams, and so the city at Daly City is very pleased about that and looking forward to what it's going to do for that area. And so.
Okay. Commissioner Shapiro?
Has anyone looked at how California compares to other states in terms of the state fair industry in other states?
Yeah, in other states, generally the only state-owned fairground, state-operated fair is the state fair, Minnesota State Fair, Nebraska State Fair. All the others are either county fairs or, again, nonprofits operating county fairs throughout the Midwest. A lot of them are volunteer-driven. They have a volunteer board and they have a part-time staff, and they do have property that generally isn't used for anything else but at fair time. But we're very rare in our whole makeup that we have these district ag associations that are entities of the state. And that's
because I believe other states have experienced real growth in their fairs economically. I'm just curious if that's something we've looked at and as to why that may be or why that may not be.
I haven't looked to see if they have grown any more than California fairs have. I know, again, it depends on their funding structure. Some of them receive funding from the state, although it's not in the sizes, the amounts that California funded its fairs by. And again, it depends on what their core mission is and where their revenues come from and their markets and all that kind of.
Commissioner Kay had another question.
Yeah, this is a very interesting discussion, but I sort of feel like we're a little off point, at least of kind of the large issue that we're here to talk about, and that's asset management. You described the success story at the Madera County Fair, which was impressive to me. And now we're talking about the sort of the fiscal plight of district fairs around the state that happen to sit on state property. But we haven't talked much about, well, what can state public policy do, or state leadership in your office or elsewhere do to help promote other successes around the state like there are in Madera County? I mean, if in fact it's the legislature's or somebody else's decision that we ought to retain ownership of this land because there are good local or public safety purposes to do it, then shouldn't there be some kind of a strategy to help these local entities get the best value out of their land? I mean, maybe there's not an inch of room or a minute of the day that you could possibly do anything better than they're doing right now, but that's probably not the case.
Right.
Do you have a strategy to replicate the Madera experience in other places, especially those struggling places, or is this something where you're sort of waiting for somebody to come and say, we need help, or you're on your own? I'm trying to tie this together a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that 18 months ago, it was something that was encouraged of fairs, but F&E's primary purpose was to allocate funds and provide oversight that state funds were being properly spent. And we encouraged fairs and helped fair, if they called up and said, boy, we'd like to do this, then we helped them get with DGS and things along that line. Things have changed a little bit now without the funding. And we are looking at ways to try to assist the fairs and get the word out and talk with them about, have you looked at the Madera model? And of course, we can't tell them to do that, but, we can provide information. We have annual trainings with the managers and the board members, and we try to get the word out there that, this is the time that you all should be looking at these kinds of things. We're here to help you do this and that kind of thing. So we're cheerleading it right now, but as F&E is transforming, we don't have a set written program of how we're going to go out and do that yet.
And you don't have any leverage, and the state doesn't have any leverage on these entities to say, if you want to survive and thrive, you need to do this. Is that correct?
No, we don't have any leverage to do that. We say that quite often.
But it has some leverage through appointments. I mean, the administration.
Well, yeah, the administration has leverage through appointments, of which the governor is, but they're termed appointments, so you have to wait until there's an expired term, which there are a bunch right now, and so they're slowly but surely doing the appointment process.
Okay, so this is so. But for the accident of of state ownership of the property, these are obviously, and the state appointment of the boards, neither of those is trivial, but they're still, incidental to the fact that these are run by these boards. No state money involved anymore. It's sort of up to them to decide whether they're going to do this. Setting that on one side. On the other hand, the state of California owns the property,
Right.
And there should be some. I would think that the legislature or the administration or somebody would have a desire to see that property be used to at least a higher value than it is today. Is there any initiative within the administration to try to move that forward, understanding the constraints that you have with locally appointed bodies?
Yeah, well, they are, and the boards aren't appointed locally; they are appointed by the governor. And
I mean,
yeah,
state appointed, but
local.
They come out of the local, and they're not.
Correct.
They're not directed by the
Correct.
state agency.
Correct. Well, it's kind of a combination of all of those things. I mean, it's, again, we are working at the state level to try to find avenues for these state entities to become more entrepreneurial. Right now, it is quite cumbersome to do a real estate development on state property just as a state agency. There's a lot of hoops to jump and things like that. But we do have, the Department of General Services, and under Director Fred Klaus, we have a great, wonderful working relationship with them now that I can't say always existed in the most recent past. And so they are really helping to streamline, understanding that these district ag associations, need some assistance in being able to come up with different land uses and opportunities. And they're really working closely together. So I think it is going in that direction. Everybody is trying to do what they can. Again, if the fair doesn't want to do it, if the board and the management, don't think that they want to pursue it, there's not that much that we can do, unless we consider complete mismanagement, and then we have the authority to go in and suspend their powers. But nobody really wants to do that unless it's, super critical.
Was the general fund support withdrawn from CalExpo as well?
Yes, the little bit that CalExpo got. They didn't receive a base allocation. They got $265,000 a year toward their pro rata, which was in code. But they're a separate state department. And so they generate their own revenues, and they participated in funding programs like other fairs did. They could borrow money from us and, for certain projects and things like that. But they don't have any access to that anymore.
Okay.
As everybody else.
So they're self-supporting.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
If I may, Mr. Chair, those are state-owned properties, but it's also known as publicly owned properties. It's all ours. Those who don't do their best to make something out of it, I'm okay that for them to be understood, they're on the chopping block. But my question is always, let's say you were to sell a property, where does the money go and how is it spent? I wouldn't just sell to sell because that's the choice of the majority, but what do we do with the money? And how soon do we waste it?
Yeah, it depends. Currently, I believe that if State Fairgrounds is sold, the money is supposed to go into the F&E fund, the Fairs and Expositions Fund. However, like with the most recent sale that didn't happen in Orange County, the legislation that went forth to allow that sale said the money went to the general fund. So I think it depends on the day and the proposal and things along that line. We've had a couple of fairgrounds that over the years sold their properties and now they lease property to put on their event. And they were allowed to retain those funds in order to pay for leases and or acquire new property to put on a fairground.
Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming. Yes, sir.
Could I make a comment or two?
Yeah, you can talk under the public comment period. Come on up.
Whenever that starts.
It just started.
We'll do the point counterpoint today. Our friend Bob White used to say that he hated fairs because whenever there was a fair board opening, he would have to make 400 calls to find one person that would accept the appointment, except for the Cow Palace and the Del Mar Racetrack, where he got 400 calls to sit on the board.
Yes.
So that the now please and say hello to Bob for me, please. On the waiting list, I'll add Pastor Robles to that list. There are enormous benefits to fairgrounds. I don't mean to condemn them in any way. What they do for the kids and 4-H and FFA, amazing stuff. There are fairgrounds that do very well. 2 points. If the Office of Emergency Services needs these properties for its use on an emergency basis, put them in their budget. Go ask the Director of Emergency Services which properties he wants, and he'll tell you he wants about 4 properties, not 70. That's number one. Number two, the fairgrounds of this state are a disaster. They're going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years. And they are going to go bankrupt. Maybe not Paso Robles, maybe not Del Mar, but they're going to be fairgrounds. They're going to go bankrupt. When they do, you're going to have all the payroll responsibility, all the uncompensated leave liability, and all the things are going to fall back on the state. And you can bet you that they're going to be in the courts to get that money from the state. So, you can sit back and wait for that crisis to occur, or you can get on ahead of the curve and start to deal with the issues that are there. I, for one, would not want a fairgrounds manager doing leasing of a fairgrounds property. I mean, probably not within his wheelhouse of expertise. So somebody should do something. I mean, I'd be happy to try to come up with some ideas for what can be done, but I don't think it's an issue that should be simply said we need all of that property. I mean, I think that some focus needs to be placed on it.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And I appreciate your input. And this is discussion, not an argument. We had a number of people on the fair board, pretty much handpicked by the governor, whoever happened to be then, and with the help of board members who came with different expertise, business attorneys, that helped any leasing that there needed to be done. But when we go back to the emergency, we're a very horse-friendly community. And emergency is not just during fire, it could be during flood as well. It just happened that this fairground is in a location out of the flood zone, easy access, so it's not that easily replaceable. So it's not that
maybe the county could control it
to address our emergency issues, but it's a location that well suited for that purpose.
And perhaps the county could control it then. I mean,
and I don't have a problem if the issue is let's not just fence it and move away or sell it to any bidder. Let's give the local jurisdiction a say as who has a first right of refusal.
Yeah, I hope I didn't convey the message that I thought they all should be sold. But they all can be used much better than they are, and they might be used much better than they are in the hands of somebody other than the state of California.
It's not what you convey. With my experience, if it's not spelled out, anything can happen.
It's true. It's true. So, Lauren, your questions are well asked in terms of who's watching this crisis in the making. I wonder whether the governor is asking future appointees whether they're going to this fair board and what their plan is with the fair board. What's the mission of the new appointee? Probably not a lot of time being spent on that, just because it's, in the greater scope of California government, this is not the most important issue. But to locals, it's a really important issue. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John.
I have no other requests from the public to speak, so hearing that, we'll adjourn the public hearing. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes in the conference room at 9:25 downstairs, and we'll have lunch and then convene the business meeting.